and gentlemen, welcome to the fourth installment of KnR Live, where we bring the entertainment to you. And other times we do other things like forget how to English. Rick, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a great year here in the entertainment industry, and having a lot of fun with it so far. It's raining over here kind of intermittently, and you probably can't hear it, but in the case that, it starts, crazy storm starts to get in here and cracks my windows and, destroys my room, I think that'll make for a more entertaining episode, but let's hope that doesn't happen. We got some great things coming up on this episode. Very, very interesting person we're going to be talking to. Before we get into that, we want to go ahead and introduce today's sponsor. So here's our sponsor break for today. Here's our sponsor for today. Please give them your money.
This episode of KnR Live is brought to you by Harry's Hands. I've lived my life telling people, I wish I had more hands so I could give you 3 thumbs up. Well, now you can! Harry's Hands is your one-stop shop for all things hands. Big hands, small hands, hands for high fives, hands for waving to your cute little niece, hands for absolutely everything. This weekend, KnR Live listeners can buy one hand and get another free. Right-hand purchases only by visiting harryhands.org/KnRLive to redeem this once-in-a-blue-moon offer. Harry Hands, give yourself a hand. Thank you for your sponsorship, Harry Hands. Let's get back to our show. Rick, take us away, please.
Absolutely. So today's guest comes all the way from my network of friends. He's got very many colorful titles and credentials to his name, and if he's not widely known throughout the postdoc field of academia, he totally should. With specialties across fields in geography and anthropology, to include lithic technology and raw materials, archaeological method and theory, Folsomirum resource analysis and variations, and most insignificantly, a great friend of mine. I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Lassen. Thank you very much for joining our show today. It's really great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Hey guys, yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So just kind of as a quick story to get started, I met Dr. Lassen in a group of friends who are mainly tied together by a joint game of Frisbee that we used to play. All that to say that the important part of that is to really highlight that amazing and interesting individuals can pop up like pretty much anywhere in your life in many different situations. And it's kind of funny that I ran into all these geniuses on the field, and now I get to interview most of them here. So I guess, well, kind of knowing that, can you give us an idea of what fields that you're very passionate in and studying in right now, and where your educational journey took you to? Like, how did you, I know you've been kind of around the country, but how'd you come to end up here in Central Texas for your studies?
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. So I do archaeology. My specialty within archaeology is prehistoric stone tools. So, typically like arrowheads and spear points, but also, more obscure stuff like cores and scrapers and flake tools and all those sorts of things that preserve really well in the archaeological record when all else fails, when all the organic stuff dies out and nothing's left. The stone tools still remain. So I got into studying those things. And you can see pretty far back in time with stone tools, and so that's pretty neat. But yeah, I first got into archaeology. I don't know if you want me to go this far back, but I got into it in elementary school, like 2nd grade. A friend of mine started digging a hole at recess behind the playground, and he worked on that hole with me for a couple weeks or so. I worked on that hole for 2 years, 2nd grade through 4th grade, and I know you can't see me right now, but I'm going to show some things, as we go, and I know you'll get to see it eventually. But I have this little bone sitting on my desk, and it was the first thing that I found in that hole, and I thought that was really cool. It's like, wow, it's just a little animal bone, but it's like, hey, you can find these things anywhere. You don't have to go to Egypt. You don't have to go to ancient Greece. It's like, this is really neat. So that's when I started getting into archaeology. But I didn't really get into it like professionally until grad school, actually. So I went off to college. Through high school, I had volunteered on some local excavations around Houston with the local archaeological societies. And then at that point, my parents were like, "Yeah, you don't want to do this as a career. It's more of a hobby." So I went to college without thinking seriously about archaeology. Got my college degree, and I ended up with a job that I really hated. It was for people who have seen Office Space. It was basically Office Space, very corporate, very like just drudgery type of stuff. And so I was like, you know what? That's it. I'm going to go do what I love. I don't care if other people think it's not a way to earn a living. I'm going to do it. So I went into archaeology. I went into grad school. And while I was there, I noticed that I was most interested in my initial like core introductory classes, like archaeological methods and theory and stuff. I was most interested when they would talk about the stone tools. So I'm like, all right, well, that's what I'm going to do. So that's where my research kind of went from there. And so that's been my main focus. And since I also do old stuff, basically, I study the what's called the Paleo-Indian period, which is the earliest Native Americans who got here during the Ice Age. Basically, what they did when they just got to the Americas, and how they made their tools, how they hunted their animals, how they where they camped, where they gathered plants, all that sort of stuff is what I'm really into. And so those sites go back 13,000, sometimes more years. So in order to understand sites like that, you also have to have some understanding of geology. So I've taken like sediment stratigraphy, geomorphology, and I've also taken mineralogy to better understand the rocks that they used. So I have a kind of a little bit of a geological background, kind of enough to understand what geologists talk about, but not enough to like see it very easily myself in the field. I still don't have quite the trained eye that they have, but at least I can keep up with their conversations. But yeah, my particular specialty is the stone tools themselves. And in the course of learning and understanding prehistoric stone tools, I also learned and understood like how to make them myself. Experimental archaeology is a really cool branch of archaeology, and you'll see it sometimes on TV when people talk about, well, it's like, how did they build the pyramids? I don't know. Let's try to build our own pyramid using techniques that existed at the time.
Yeah.
That's experimental archaeology. Well, the same thing applies on a smaller scale to like stone tools. It's like, well, this site has really cool spear points, and we have all this stone debris from them making these spear points. Let's see if we can kind of reverse engineer this and try to make them ourselves. And so that's something that I'm really into, and a number of my colleagues that I've worked with throughout my education and career have been into it as well. So let's see. I'm trying to remember the other parts of your question. I kind of went on.
No, yeah, that's okay. So, I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but you earned your doctorate at the University of Tennessee. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So from there, did that take you directly over here to Texas, or how'd you end up getting over here from there?
So I've lived the vast majority of my life in Texas. I was born in Kentucky, but my parents moved to the Houston area when I was still just a baby. And I did my undergraduate degree at Southwestern up in Georgetown, so not too far away from you and I. And then when I went on to do my master's degree, I went to Texas A&M. And so I worked for a couple years in the same sort of, not the same company, but the same sort of position that I have now, just a lower level of it. I worked at a couple years, and then I decided, let's go get my PhD. And I talked to a friend of mine about, it's like, I don't want all of my degrees to be from Texas. I need to expand my horizons and look elsewhere. And my friend recommended the man who became my advisor for my PhD in Tennessee, Dave Anderson. And he's a guy who studies kind of geographic distributions of Ice Age peoples, and he's really into kind of the GIS big picture stuff. But it also, as I learned when I went and visited him and talked with him in Tennessee, he's also a huge sci-fi nerd with an extensive book collection, and he brews his own beer and mead. I'm like, yeah, you and I are going to be best friends. So yeah, I went to Tennessee to study with Dave Anderson, and it worked out really well. I really enjoyed my time there, and I got a PhD out of it, and so I'm thrilled. Now I ended up coming back to Texas because one of the downsides that Dave had warned me about when I was coming to Tennessee. He's like, look, really like you, think we'll get along well. The only issue is I don't have a dissertation topic for you. I'm like, it's okay. We'll figure it out, as I go through my graduate career. And so sometime around the end of my first year, beginning of my second year, during the PhD program, we were visited by Michael Collins, who is he's a research professor. Originally, when I first knew him with the University of Texas, then he moved to Texas State for several years, which is when I became more acquainted with him. And now he's back at the University of Texas. But this was during his Texas State phase. And so he came and gave a series of lectures. And at the end of one of his lectures, he was like, well, I have an interesting study on the Folsom period, which is the period of Paleo-Indians in North America 12,000 years ago. He's like, if any enterprising grad student wants to study this topic, let me know. I'm like, that's what I want to do. So I worked closely with Michael Collins. Basically, during the summer, I would go to Texas State and work in his lab. And then during the school year, I'd be back up in Tennessee and working with Dave Anderson. So I kind of split my time like that. And so after I graduated with my PhD, I got hired on full time at Mike Collins' lab, the Galt lab. That lab specializes particularly in one archaeological excavation that is about 50 miles north of Austin called the Galt site. That's Gault. And it's a really cool, super ancient stone tool making campsite, basically. And they offer tours and stuff through a couple of the local museums, and I highly recommend it if anyone is interested touring some like ancient Texas history, like extremely ancient, as in like 16,000 years ancient. It's a really, really neat place. So I worked on that project, on those materials for I think about 5 years. I was there from 2014 until last year. So yeah, that's how I became affiliated with Rick and Adam and Laura and all those people, because I worked in that lab. And Adam did the IT basically for the anthropology department. And so he would come in and help us with our computers and stuff. And then him and Laura started dating, and Laura had been my friend for a good while. So that's how I kind of got enmeshed in this group and started playing frisbee with everyone and met Rick. So that's how all roads led to this.
There you go.
That's pretty.
Yeah,
cool.
we were gonna say you made it to KnR Live, so this is pretty much like the highest point of your career, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So speaking of stone tools, my brother was telling me a little bit about your specialty with an art called flint knapping.
That's correct.
I'm not entirely sure what that is, but I'm certain like there's a lot of people listening and watching also join me in that. So I'm pretty curious. Is that something that you can like describe by itself, or is it part of a larger topic that requires more explanation?
Well, I mean, I can describe it. It'd be really good, to recommend like YouTube videos. There's one channel, I believe it's called Flint Knapping Tips, and it's the guy's name is Marty Reuter. He's a guy I know, and he is probably one of, if not the best professional flint knappers I know. Like his career is flint knapping. Mine, for me, it's my hobby. I do it for educational and entertainment purposes.
Yeah.
He makes a living at it, and he's incredible. So if you want to see it being done live by a master, he's one of the ones I would recommend. But I'll try to describe it as best I can. Just sitting here in my apartment. It's basically the art of taking a stone, basically a stone that has a high silica content. So flint, obsidian, agate sometimes. There's a few other materials. Jasper works. Anything that has a high silica content, basically, if it breaks like glass, then it can be flint knapped. And normally, when you think of something breaking like glass, you think of it shattering into a bunch of fragments and just being totally unpredictable. But the thing about glass and these materials is they have a fracture property called conchoidal fracture, which, when manipulated properly, actually is predictable. It's basically you hit it and the force radiates through the stone at a certain angle. I think it's roughly a 60-degree angle. And once you get the feel for the angle at which the force propagates through the stone, then you can use that to peel off pieces of stone called flakes. So you create an edge around whatever piece of stone you're working on. And then you can set up the edge in such a way that you knock off flakes and just peel it down and thin it down into the shape that you want. And so I hope that that's an accurate description. It definitely helps when you're doing a demonstration or showing a video at the same time. But it's a way of making a wide variety of tools, and it's pretty neat. There's also a variety of tools that are used in the flint knapping process in order to knock off those flakes. The simplest and most obvious being the hammerstone, which is just basically another rock. But usually hammerstones are kind of round, roughly egg-shaped, egg size, and they'll usually be made of something a bit sturdier than the silica-based material that you'll be knocking the flakes off of. So a hammerstone can be it can be granite, it can be quartzite, it can be maybe like some sort of basalt. Basically anything that's that's going to be able to take a strike and hold itself together. And then you can use a hammerstone to knock off somewhat chunky flakes. And then from there, once you rough out what you want to make, then you'll want to switch to something that can knock off flakes with a little bit more precision. Prehistorically, that was usually some form of antler, like either just the tip end of a deer antler or an elk antler can be held against the edge of the piece you're working with and then struck with whatever you want. And then that was called indirect percussion. Or you can hit it with basically make a club called a billet out of the opposite end of the antler, the end that sticks into the skull. Grind that down, shape that into a club-like shape, and then just knock off flakes directly. And normally people think it's like you can use antlers to break rocks, and yeah, it actually works. And it makes flakes that are thinner and kind of the best way I can describe it is potato chip shaped. So you can use those flakes to really kind of smooth down the thing that you're working on. And then at the very end, you do what's called pressure flaking, which is where you take, prehistorically, it would have been the pointy end of the antler, basically a slice of the tine of the antler. And you just, you have to basically collapse your body in such a way that you're holding the stone you're working on against one knee, you're holding the pressure flaker against another knee, and then you use the shoulders and your whole body just to press the tip of that antler against the spot on the edge of the stone you want to work on, and it'll press off really small, like sometimes long, slim flakes if you're really going at it. And that's to kind of sharpen and refine the edge and to refine the shape of the stone tool at the very end. And so it's a pretty cool process, and it's a high learning curve because I mean, yeah, when you're working with stuff that breaks like glass, starting out it can be very frustrating. You just take one rock and make it into a bunch more smaller rocks. But if you stick with it, then it becomes really cool. Like when I made my first point, it was like this big revelation moment for me. I'm like, oh my God, I can do this. All right. And I wasn't consistent at it and I wasn't great at it, but stick with it. And especially if you can, there are communities of flint knappers around the country. And I know there's some in Texas that I'm occasionally in touch with, and they do what's called nap-ins, where not so much right now during the quarantine, but when things are less, disease-ridden, they'll get together for a weekend and just hang out and do a bunch of flint knapping and share tools and trade secrets and techniques and stuff. And so that's a really good way to like kind of get the gist of the ins and outs of it and the best ways to do what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So the process of shaping the flint and other resources, I mean, to its core, is it very different than the other craftsmanship like blacksmithing or like making bricks or anything like that?
Well, yeah, it is because it's a different process. So with blacksmithing and brick making and stuff, you're kind of putting stuff together and then shaping it however you want to shape. Whether it's like I assume with the bricks you use a mold. With blacksmithing, you get your steel, and I don't know whether with blacksmithing you're getting steel billets like ready made, or if you're trying to what am I trying to say? Smelt the steel yourself. I guess that's a really hardcore way to do it. But either way, you're basically taking elements and putting them together and then making them into the shape that you want. With flint knapping, it's a reductive process. So you're starting off with a block or whatever piece of stone you're working with, and you're trimming it down. So I feel like with ceramics and maybe to a lesser extent with blacksmithing, you can work with the materials. Like if you screw it up, then you can basically lump it back together and then rework it again. With flint knapping, there's no real do-overs. I always There was one quote I did when I was doing a demonstration for some students, and it wasn't going my way. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, and I said, I'd like to say in flint knapping there are no accidents, just happy mistakes, but that's not true.
That's
This is
not true. Yeah. So, this. I was just thinking. Do you think? I'm sure you probably researched this, but it seems like this type of skill is very was super useful. In like an ancient world. Do you think it was, or do you know, was it a well learned trade? Like a lot of people knew it. Like today's, an engineer or a businessman, businesswoman. I mean, was it? Do you think it was a well known kind of trade to have in the ancient world?
I think generally, yes, but once again, there's variations to that. So I think when you're looking at basically prehistoric hunter gatherers, I think people all had a baseline level where it's like they can make uh, to a good extent they can make any tool they needed.
Right.
There were people who were super good at it, and this is what became obvious in my Folsom research. Folsom spear points. I have a small example. This is a cast of one, so it's actually plastic. But this is an example of a Folsom point. Let me get the thinness there. So these points are extremely well made, and they're extremely hard to make. I have not successfully made one yet. And so I think and one of the things I did in my dissertation was I did kind of a skill level sort of analysis of all the points that I looked at. And I saw that there was kind of this hierarchy of skill levels with different, like within the Folsom complex, and the traditional Folsom point that people in the field know and love is the highest epitome of that skill. But then you go down the line, there's like midland points and there's pseudo fluted points and there's these other types that look like they were made by people who didn't quite have that skill level to reach the classic Folsom point that we know, but they could work their way around that and still make a functional tool. So I think to answer your question for like the Paleo-Indian period, everybody had a level of knowledge where they could get by.
Uh-huh.
But then there were people who were particularly skilled at it,
Yeah.
who would make what I called the fine china, basically. One of the interesting things in the Folsom research that I came across was these guys were specialized bison hunters. And these were Ice Age bison. So these are like a third larger than bison we know today. And those things are already beasts. These things were, and then they had much bigger horns and everything too. They were pretty cool. So they specialized in hunting these ancient bison, and they would do occasionally like seasonal communal kills, where they would basically find a way to trap or isolate a herd, and then kill this herd of bison, and then just butcher them all and have a giant feast basically.
Yeah.
And so these kills, these events like that take a massive amount of organization. It's like multiple communities of people getting together. And so one of the things that we notice at these sites compared to like smaller campsites where it might have been just, a family that was off on their own or whatever, at these communal kills, all the spear points that are left behind that were stuck in the bodies of these bison and, they got lost in the gore or whatever, all these spear points were the really good ones.
Yeah.
They're the fine china. So it seems like they would save their best Folsom points for these community events and be like, hey, look what I got. We're going to kill some bison with these cool points. Whereas when they're in their smaller groups or just everyday campsites or whatever, they just use whatever point they might have on hand, which may or may not be as skilled as that. So yeah, I think there were people who were particularly good at it, but everybody could do it. Right. And then as time went on, you get to more complex hierarchical sedentary societies. So you get the Mesoamericans in Mexico, you get the Aztecs and the Maya, and then in North America you get the Mississippians, and they had a roughly state level social hierarchy. So they had their rulers, they had their farmers, they had artisans, and among those artisans they had flint knapping specialists. And those guys, they weren't making cool points for killing bison. They were making cool like ceremonial things. Like in Mississippian sites, there are these things that we basically call swords. They're like 2 foot long, 2 foot long stone blades, basically.
Yeah.
And we know it's one of those few things that we know for sure were ceremonial, because it's kind of a joke in archaeology. It's like when you don't know the function of something, it's ceremonial. But with these, it's like we literally have images of people, like shell engravings of people dancing while holding these, and like all this regalia and stuff. It's like, well, here's your ceremony.
Right.
So yeah, they have those in the Mississippian sites like Cahokia near St. Louis, and Mountainville in Alabama, and sites like that. And then in Mesoamerica and like the Aztec and Maya world, you get these really cool. The best examples are called Maya eccentrics, which are like these huge 2+ foot long stone flint knapped sculptures, essentially. So they're flat because they're flint knapped the same way you would flint knap a blade, but then they're like intricately like serpentine looking, and they have faces and hands and stuff sticking out of them. And you'd have to I highly recommend just Google Maya eccentric and see what comes up. It's really, really neat.
Yeah.
So those are made by highly specialized people. Like it's the best flint knappers today still have an extremely hard time trying to replicate those art objects. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, so getting that up, like I guess flint knapping, of course, probably primarily made for functional tools, but I guess they could use it to like make their art and probably some other purposes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And and of course, it looks like with a lot of cultures, things, it's a gray area, because for a lot of people in the past, especially, ceremony, the sacred and the profane don't have a dividing line. There's a spiritual aspect to everything. Right. And that's something that we see at some of these communal kill sites. There'll be like these posts, or at least the traces we can see in the ground where a post used to be, and there'll be like offerings left around it. Or there's one site in Oklahoma where they found underneath all the bison bones a single crushed bison skull that was painted in a red lightning bolt down the forehead. It was like like they were and there's ethnographic accounts from when Europeans were coming across the country of plains bison hunters using posts with bison skulls on top, decorated bison skulls, as kind of like their ritualistic post to help like summon the bison to the corral that they're going to try to drive them into. Oh, wow. So it seems like there's an unbroken line of that going on, and it looks like to some extent the tools were involved in that. We find caches and offerings of tools in a number of Paleo-Indian complexes. Clovis, the 13,000-year-old. They were originally known as mammoth hunters. They hunted a lot of other stuff. They did a lot of other stuff, but their main claim to fame is that they hunted mammoths. They left these basically cache offerings of artifacts in some sites, and you can tell like there's a distinction where some of them were just stockpiles of materials they wanted to come back and get later, but some of them, like one of them is left with a human burial, and some of them, like it's these really pristine spear points and stuff, where it really looks like we hate jumping to the leap of calling things ceremonial, but some of those really look ceremonial. So stone tools definitely played a role in the spiritual lives of these people, in addition to serving practical purpose.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure that, I mean, just like with any society, like as you kind of like build that up, then like there's going to be a little bit more I guess like non-functional sort of methods that they'll go for things like that. So I guess that kind of makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So cool. Yeah. Thanks for that. I think like from this point, we want to take a little bit of a turn. We still want to ask some questions, but yeah, we'll kind of touch on some of that here in just a little bit. But I want to go ahead and introduce our next segment here that Dr. Lassen, you can actually participate in. So this is our segment called Fan Mail. So here, in fan mail, we just take we take tweets and messages and letters and actual envelopes that absolutely 100% are totally genuine, and we didn't make them up at all. We'll take some of these and we'll kind of get everyone's opinion on this. Kyle, you want to go ahead with the first one we got?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So let's see. First, we got one from Patrick Stewart. Note here, not the actor, different person with the same name. He says, but it says, what's the best Wi-Fi name you've ever seen? I'll throw this over to Rick. What do you think the best Wi-Fi name is that you have ever seen?
I am very proud of mine. Okay. my own. I've seen some good ones. You know, some people use the whole like hide your kids, hide your Wi-Fi, and whatnot. Mine at my home is tell my Wi-Fi love her.
Awesome. Dr. Lassen, do you have one that you can think of?
Yeah, my own is just Tennessee Bob, because that's what one of my professors always calls me, and I like it. But my favorite one that I've seen is Router. I don't even know her.
That's awesome. I think for me, this was when people were like, yanking everybody's Wi-Fi from like neighbors and stuff. But a long time ago, I saw one that said Nacho Wi-Fi. Like,
yeah.
Like I've seen some that like steal this Wi-Fi instead or whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll get the next one here. We got a tweet in from @BorgeWGush. Let's see. We're seeing a resurgence of 90s and 2000s nostalgia as of late. What are we going to be nostalgic for in about 20 to 30 years? That's a really good question. Yeah, we're starting to see like a lot of the 90s and 2000s music is for sure making a comeback. We're watching a lot of those shows. I guess like probably in 20 to 30 years, and I'm probably going to be wrong about this, but I imagine like once we get out of quarantine and everything and down the road, we're going to look back and be like, hey, remember that time where it wasn't expected that we would have to leave our houses? I kind of miss that maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think somehow that we're going to miss the stay at home little law that's kind of in place, the wear your mask. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say that now, but I just feel like we're gonna miss something about this.
We'll miss something about it for sure. Like, of course, we want, you want things to get better for sure and kind of 100%. Progress along from there. But there will be something, I don't know. I can see the memes in like
remember
2045. Like, man, at one point we didn't even have to leave our house, and now we got to do all these things. I bet.
Yeah, it'll be cool if companies become more willing to embrace working from home. But time will tell.
That's right.
I think it would be really, really interesting if in 20 years the kids of that age decide that all these crazy designer masks that we had during this time period that we had to wear, they're like, those are cool, let's wear those for fun. And then it becomes a trend to like wear masks everywhere.
Yeah,
that's true. You could hold on to the ones you have. They might be worth
lots of money later.
25 years.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
You want to do the last one?
Yeah. So this next one here is from Zeus. No last name given. That seems familiar. But it says, if animals could talk, which species would dominate the late night talk show field? That's a specific question. What do you think, Dr. Lassen? If you had a guess?
Oh, probably crows. Those are some mischievous creatures. Yeah, I think it's like imagine humans, but with even less of a social filter. Is kind of how I imagine them.
I get it. Like crows and pigeons, probably, because pigeons don't shut up.
Yeah.
I think that, and I think kind of on that field too. Like, it depends on the kind of talk show you're doing, but Jerry Springer's probably going to be hosted by a honey badger. Very, very loud and aggressive. I think that's my take on that.
Yeah, I would definitely say every late night show has like a host or rather a host, yes, but also an announcer. I think the announcer would be like a parrot, a parakeet, something like that. That would, that would just
Like
kind of
the MC
interject.
for it.
Yeah, that would interject random lines, and then the host would actually be some kind of monkey or chimpanzee, because they're funny, and people like
Entertaining.
they tune in to laugh, So that's what I think.
Awesome. Love
But
it.
Anyway, so Dr. Lassen, thank you for joining us for today's fan
Yeah.
mail. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And also to our audience, remember that you can submit your questions as well. You can either email us at knrliveproductions@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram. Just find us at knr_live. This has been Fan Mail. Well, that about does it for this episode. If you want to connect with Dr. Lassen, there will be a link to where you can do that in the description, as well as if you want to connect with myself and Rick, our links will be in the description below with Instagram. If you want to send in some fan mail or you just want to talk, email us at knrliveproductions@gmail.com. And Rick, I think that's about it. So why don't you send us on our way?
That's right. All right. So, folks, everyone, remember, when you request a musician to play Freebird, stop joking around and stare them in the eyes until they comply. Good night, everyone.